Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Um, Again, a webinar. We will wait 1 more minute so we can give people the opportunity to dial in if they're just a little bit too late. So let's wait 1 more minute. Okay, it's 18:32 here on my clock. So good evening from my perspective to everybody. Good morning and good afternoon to some other people across the globe or around the globe. Welcome for again a webinar. It's shortly after our previous one last week. We had our interesting session with our case studies, and today we have another very interesting topic. At least in my opinion, I'm quite convinced you find it as interesting as I do. So today we want to focus on the cooperation with the media or cooperating with the media, whatever you want to call it. We were looking to find a real expert in that area to help us, giving us some tips and tricks perhaps and some guidance around this topic. And we are very happy that Grania Willis accepted our invitation to be our host today. She is now an executive communications consultant, but we all know her also in her previous role as the FEI communications director. Grania, we're really thankful that you wanted to accept our invitation, that you want to tell us some more around this topic. And at the end of the session, we will have also the opportunity for Q&As to be raised during the or through the chat session. If there are really spot on questions you want to ask on specific topics, drop them in the chat. And if we can, Ali will coordinate and try to intervene if appropriate or if needed, even within the session. But we try to bundle the questions at the end, if at all possible. That being said, a warm welcome to everybody. And of course, a warm welcome to our host for today. Grania, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Glenn, and thank you to Ali as well for organising this. It's a great honour to be talking to you all this evening in my part of the world. I'm in Switzerland, but as Glenn said, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. I'm going to talk today about cooperating with the media. I'll share my screen now. So as I was saying, I think possibly some of you will be wondering what on earth is the point of this, because the vast majority of you probably will never have any interaction with the media. But this session is still relevant to everybody because mostly the media has changed so much. And now with what I like to call citizen journalists, everybody's looking for stories and everybody has voice through Instagram or through Facebook or through blogs or X. So you actually could already be cooperating with the media without even realizing it. So a bit about me. Thanks, Glenn, for the introduction. Prior to all of the content that Glenn talked about, I was an international athlete. I was not show jumping, unfortunately, although I did do a lot of show jumping. I rode in eventing for Ireland. Subsequent to that, I became a journalist for the Irish Times and the Irish Field, and a reporter also for RT radio and television. I was then headhunted to go to Hong Kong as a consultant on the equestrian events for Beijing 2008, and I worked there for 18 months. And after that, I then became communications director at the FEI. And now, as Glenn advised you, I'm an executive communications consultant. When I think things have changed so much since the days when I was a journalist. In those days, you were trained, you understood media ethics, you understood the libel laws, but citizen journalists are not trained. And the really aggressive ones, the negative ones that we've all seen online, tend to remain anonymous, hiding behind pseudonyms. And obviously you couldn't do that as a real journalist. But I hope that you are all aware of how important it is that we are able to cooperate with the media. And I'm talking about traditional media rather than social media. And it's even more crucial, really, with the current focus on welfare issues within our sport. So I'll be looking at this from two perspectives. If you are the official, if you are the official spokesperson, what you can and maybe what you can't say, and there may be times when there are things that you cannot say, and if you are not the official spokesperson. So how can you keep the media happy without actually giving them anything except courtesy? And without saying no comment, that is definitely not going to happen. Or even worse, I've been told not to speak to the media, and that has happened in the past, but certainly that shouldn't be happening in the future. I'll also be taking a look at social media and the ongoing public acceptance of our sport and how that impacts our interactions with the media. So a quick rundown on what I'll be covering within all of that. I'll be looking at, as Glenn said, tips and tricks on interview techniques, something about body language and what to say and what not to say if you're ambushed by the media. I'll be looking at positive messaging, how and when to use it, and clearly that's not appropriate if you're talking about a serious incident in your discipline. But there will be times, if you are the designated spokesperson, when you can address the tough question and then bridge, so in other words, then link onto your positive messaging. And I'll talk a bit about communications in a crisis. So cooperating with the media has a lot to do with reputation management, both of the sport and the FEI itself. But I think it's important to remember also the potential knock-on effect on your own reputation as an international jumping official. So I use this quote from Warren Buffett, and I think it's perfect. It takes 20 years to build a reputation and only 5 minutes to ruin it. Unfortunately, it's no longer true because it's actually more likely that it's 5 seconds, that within 5 seconds you can ruin your reputation or the reputation of the sport or the reputation of the FEI. So how do we maintain the reputation of equestrian sport, which quite frankly has taken centuries to build, and how does cooperating with the media come into it? So let's start with what the media want. They want timely information, they want facts, they want them now, and they want updates if there has been an incident. They want one spokesperson. We must have consistent messaging. Credibility is lost if spokespersons are all saying different things. If you are the designated spokesperson on behalf of the FEI or your national federation or whoever, you must have the official messaging or line to take. It's not about your opinion. And lastly, and this fits in with accurate details, the media want the truth. Mark Twain, the so-called father of American literature, says, if you tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything. And I think that's really true, because if you start to fabricate stories around the truth, you end up, then you forget what you've said and you trip yourself up. So let's remember that journalists are not the enemy. We need to work with them, not treat them as some sort of dangerous specimens to be avoided at all costs. If we treat them like the enemy, then they can become the enemy. And I think it's really important, as I was an equestrian specialist journalist myself, the vast majority of those specialist media are mostly involved because they love horses. That doesn't necessarily mean they love horse sport, but they do love horses. And journalists, as I said earlier on, are trained to report news in a fair, accurate, and balanced way, unlike citizen journalists who aren't trained at all. And another very important point to remember is at the Olympic Games, the media perspective becomes even more critical as our sport's being watched and reported on by a massive group of mainstream media that would not normally focus on equestrian sports. And something which I think we're seeing happening increasingly, is undercover reporting. And that's the animal rights groups who are becoming more and more vocal. And I'll talk to you a bit more about that later on, but I think it's something we all need to be aware of. So there are no exclusives and there are no injunctions in cyberspace. Nobody checks to see who got the story first, and nobody can get it taken down because the jury is still out on the libel laws governing the internet. Basically, breaking a big news story isn't always done via traditional media sources. It's frequently now being done on social media platforms by citizen journalists. So the person in the street or at a show or at somebody's yard, videoing or taking pictures with their camera phone, or somebody in a position of power who can post one tweet or a video that breaks a huge story. For specialist and mainstream media, they're often now having to analyze and comment on the news rather than breaking it. But to be honest, the good journalists are using this real-time perspective to their advantage. So if a journalist says to you, I'm off duty, in other words, they're trying to encourage you to talk to them freely, be very cautious. That to a journalist, there's no such thing as off duty. And especially with those citizen journalists who are out there trying to get the quote unquote scoop. Social media works 24/7 and so do the news channels. So if there's been an incident at the show where you're officiating, please only discuss it on site at the show where you cannot be overheard. Don't take your work home with you or to some cozy pub or restaurant, because bars have ears. Be conscious of your conversations when there might be media around or a citizen journalist sitting next to you. Media often stay in the same hotels as officials at some events. So please be very wary of what you say to the so-called friendly journalists in the bar, because the last thing you want to see is something you've said in the bar appearing on X or Instagram or somewhere else. We know that less responsible journalists, and particularly citizen journalists, deal in gossip, not facts, or not always facts. And your comment, innocent comment to a fellow FEI official, could result in the story getting much bigger and going in a completely different direction. And again, if a journalist says to you, talk to me off the record, now maybe not all of you know what off the record means. When I was a journalist, if I asked somebody to speak to me off the record, it meant that I was asking them to give me background information on something, but I wasn't going to be quoting them. I wouldn't be attributing any of that to them in my story. Unfortunately, now there's no such thing as off the record. So please never give a journalist, even someone you know, any information off the record. It's highly likely it will be used and either attributed to you personally or to a quote unquote source, and eventually it's going to leak out who that source is. Even if you're not identified as a source, just think of the damage that comment could potentially do to sport when you thought you were just providing helpful background information. I'm not saying don't trust journalists, but be wary. So I talked about reputation management, and part of that is damage limitation in the event of an unforeseen or an unavoidable incident. We need transparent and truthful communication. That is the key to minimizing the damage, and that's why one spokesperson is the way forward. So limiting the potential negativity around sudden deaths or any equine fatality is hugely important. We can have all the protocols in place to prevent accidents, but we can't prevent sudden deaths like Hickstead's in Verona back in 2011, or although there were other factors at play, the US horse chromatic BF at last year's World Cup finals in Riyadh. Both of those incidents were handled the same way, with a mixture of the organizing committee communication team and the FEI collaborating together. And that's the most important thing, that we collaborate so that the result will be coverage that is empathetic, not negative. I think, though, we need to be aware, all of us, that we're living in very different times. We're living in times of change, and I don't just mean about how media is consumed. I'm talking about societal change and things that no equine death ever is acceptable, clearly, but things that were acceptable in the past are no longer accepted now. So speed is very much of the essence when we're talking about damage limitation. We need to give media what they want, which, as I said earlier, is timely information, facts, the truth, continuous updates. And I mean continuous. If there's been an incident, they need to know what's happening. And if we keep updating them continuously, then we'll keep them happy. And they need one spokesperson. So the FEI has templates prepared, ready for use in the event of multiple incidents or issues, so that communications can be got out as soon as possible. One thing I would say, if you are president of the ground jury or chief steward, especially at big games or championships. Please establish a direct link with FEI Communications or the on-site press team and let them know soonest if there is an issue, such as a blood elimination, a serious fall on the field of play or in the warm-up, especially if the screens are up and there's a horse or a human ambulance on the field of play. It's highly likely that the comms team won't be watching the sports, though they need updates on any concerns. They will have to create factual messaging as soon as possible, so they need the facts. And please do not comment to any media if you are asked questions when an incident has just happened and is still being dealt with. At that point in time, nobody will have all the facts. So advise the journalist that there will be an update and ask them for their contact details and ask them also if they have a deadline. It used to be the case, and certainly when I first came into the FEI, it was definitely the case, but times have changed so dramatically that we had a golden hour to respond to a crisis before the media arrived at the door, and that's a metaphorical door, not a literal one. Now, social media means that this response time has reduced to zero because social media in all its forms provides a platform for comment and rumor to spread virtually instantaneously long before broadcast or traditional media has caught up. So the FEI, and this is a very important aspect of the work that the FEI comms team does, the FEI has social media alerts in place and constant monitoring, so they know what's being said, they understand the tone of voice that's being used by the commentators. So let me talk briefly about misinformation, fake news. If we don't provide the media with facts, they have to fill the vacuum with something. And the less responsible journalists and citizen journalists, so social media commentators, if you will, fill that gap with misinformation or fake news. Their motto is, and I love this, never let truth stand in the way of a good story. Now, as a former journalist, obviously I don't subscribe to that view at all. Unfortunately, human nature, it is human nature to believe that the printed word is factually correct. Now, social media platforms and news feeds are seen as the modern day printed word, and therefore they're credible. If you think about it, a lot of people don't question the veracity of the content that they're reading, particularly on social media. And since the algorithms are tweaked to provide you with the sort of content that you like to read, and it comes through on your news feed or in the form of advertising, it's highly likely that misinformation is being perpetuated effectively until it becomes, quote unquote, the truth. So just a quick clarification on the difference between misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation is false information that's spread regardless of whether there's intent to mislead, whereas disinformation is deliberately misleading or biased information, in other words, propaganda. So when distinguishing between the two, misinformation and disinformation, the key word is intent. Both disinformation and misinformation refer to types of wrong or false information, but it's only disinformation that is wrong on purpose, that is wrong deliberately. Which brings us neatly onto social media. Please never underestimate the power of social media. It's a constantly evolving landscape, and there's new platforms springing up all the time and new features within existing platforms. Back in the day when traditional media, and I'm talking about print newspapers and magazines, were the only option, that meant there was a limited lifespan to a story. Now with online and social media, content is there, online media and social media, content's there forever. And it's available to an almost limitless audience. The thing is, obviously, we're all horse lovers, or else we wouldn't be involved in sport. We're all passionate about it, and it's easy for that passion to spill over into social media in a negative way. In our private spheres, freedom of speech, of course, is a fundamental right. But when using social media, there's a very thin line between public and private, just as there is between professional and personal. Nothing is truly personal on social media. And as soon as you've posted content, you no longer control it. And you also can't control the stream of comments that your post will trigger. Even if you subsequently delete it, somebody will have copied it, and so it lives on. So your post or your comment on somebody else's post could escalate what is already a sensitive issue into a major controversy at a time when our sport is very much under scrutiny. I think I can't say it enough. We all need to be ambassadors for our sport. So I'm sure you're all aware of the FEI social media policy, which came into force on the 1st of January last year, Appendix M of the FEI General Regulations. It replaced the FEI social media guidelines, but as it's now a policy, there are sanctions for breaches. It applies to all FEI participants, and that includes FEI officials. So please make sure you know what is involved. And if you don't, you can also check out the 3-page FAQ document, which is available there. And I'm showing this because this is the funny side of social media. According to your LinkedIn profile, you're a focused, disciplined achiever. According to your Facebook photos, you love Jack Daniels and are pretty comfortable with your body. It's a timely reminder, though, that once content is posted on social media, whether it's real or fake news, it's there forever. There's a far more serious side to social media than just holiday snaps. Social media is incredibly powerful, hence the exponential growth of the influencer. A story can be twisted depending on the views of the individual who posted it and the comments who posted underneath it. So please think twice before posting anything, particularly if it's related to your work with the FEI. Social media posts should be done judiciously and responsibly, even if you're trying to convince yourself, I'll repeat it, that you're only commenting on someone else's post. Be mindful, you don't know your audience. Please exercise caution before sharing content publicly. Remember what I said about reputation management earlier on. It's about preserving our sport's reputation. It's about preserving the FEI's reputation, but it's also about self-preservation, protecting your own reputation. If in doubt, the bottom line is, if in doubt, don't post. So bad news and negativity is not exclusive to social media platforms. The fact is we have a problem, although we're of course not unique in that, but stories or fake news involving animals will always generate attention. Bad news sells, whether it's online or in traditional media, and the online version results in clicks, and both are damaging to our sport, damaging to our industry. And there, unfortunately, is more and more negative coverage, some of it unrelated to FEI disciplines, but it all fuels the debate. And every incident chips away a little at the public acceptance of our sport and the acceptance even of horses being ridden at all. Which brings me to the topic of horse abuse. Since January 22, there have been some very, very high-profile horse abuse cases or allegations of horse abuse, and 11 of those 12 have one thing in common. They're all Olympians. 3 of them are Olympic champions, so Luca Beerbaum, Mark Todd, and Charlotte Dujardin, and 3 of them are respected Olympic jumping athletes, Luca Beerbaum, Max Kühner, and Erin Ballard. The issue is, of course, these are very, very negative and very damaging to our sport. If the story includes the word Olympic, it gets much greater traction in mainstream media. It will also be picked up by IOC media monitoring. So that's the media monitoring put in place by the International Olympic Committee. And at a time when our sport is already under the microscope, we don't need IOC attention being drawn to issues within our sport. Even before the latest spate of horse abuse cases, the animal rights lobby have been out there, as well as staging protests outside shows such as Gothenburg, for example. There have also been arena incursions, and this is a screenshot taken from the 2019 FEI European Championships during the individual jumping final at Rotterdam. when two vegan activists were arrested after breaking into the arena during Dutch rider Mark Houtzager's round. I don't know how many of you were there at the time. It was terrifying. I was convinced that that woman, who you can see on the bottom left-hand corner, was actually going to get hit by the horse because Mark Houtzager didn't even notice her. But what it did achieve, they were both arrested, but what it did achieve was it achieved the goal of the activists, which was to get media coverage. Since then, that was 2019, since then the protesters have become much more vocal and much, much more political. And unfortunately, we had 3 incidents at Tokyo 2020 that gave ammunition to those activists. The first of which was on cross-country day in the eventing when the Swiss horse Jet Set didn't fall, but he had an irreparable ligament rupture that meant euthanasia was the only option. Equine fatalities have always been unacceptable, but they're becoming increasingly unacceptable to the general public. In fact, somebody actually said to me at Tokyo, it was worse to have an equine fatality than it would have been if we'd had a human fatality. And that may sound like a very callous thing to say, but to the general public, they feel that it's okay if a human, not okay, of course, it's never okay if a human were to be killed, but it's more acceptable because the human has chosen to compete, whereas the horse has not. So equine fatalities are increasingly unacceptable. And the Swiss athlete Robin Godel was only 22 at the time this happened, and he was seriously trolled online and even received death threats. Then the second incident was during the individual show jumping final when the Irish horse Kilkenny had a serious nosebleed during his round. And the horse was immediately checked by on-site vets after he completed the course, and he took no further part in the games. But it resulted in terrible, terrible pictures on both social and traditional media, including one by a photographer who I know very, very well, an equestrian photographer. And he had a picture of Kilkenny and he put diagonally across it in blood red capitals, scandalous, so scandalous, across the image. And he was increasing the damage to the sport from which this person earns a living. So to my mind, there's authenticity, yes, and there's making a judgment call. Are you doing more harm than good posting such images? Well, I think it's clear which side I would come down on. And the third incident was actually nothing to do with the FEI. It was a modern pentathlon incident, but the general public don't make any distinction between FEI disciplines and other sports involving horses. And this incident happened in the show jumping phase of the modern pentathlon when the German athlete, the borrowed horse that she was riding, wouldn't jump. And her trainer kept saying, hit it, really hit it, and actually was allegedly punching the horse. She was sent home from the games, and the athlete who had been in the lead and looking like she was going to win the gold medal dropped to 30th. It generated massive media coverage, particularly in Germany, obviously. And the FEI received complaints and questions about why they weren't doing anything about this. Obviously, the FEI does not govern modern pentathlon, and the FEI issued a statement to the media, and also Ingmar de Vos reached out proactively to the president of the governing body of modern pentathlon, offering FEI assistance. But the combination of these 3 incidents resulted in a letter from the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, which was sent to the IOC president to remove equestrian events from the Olympic Games. The letter from the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals was triggered by the modern pentathlon incident because it was sent from the German branch of PETA. It wasn't triggered by Jet Set or Kilkenny, but they did reference those 2 incidents. And the story, as you can see here, was picked up by Reuters, which is a global news agency, so it went worldwide. So it was very, very damaging to us. And then some months later, so January 2022, this book was sent to and it's as you can see, it's titled "I Can't Watch Anymore: The Case for Dropping Equestrian from the Olympic Games." It was written by Julie Taylor, who is the co-founder of Epona TV in Denmark, who sent the book to the IOC president and to every single one of the IOC members. So effectively, it was a 150-page open letter of putting forward Julie Taylor's case for dropping equestrian sport from the Olympics. And it was even more damaging because it includes both misinformation and disinformation. And obviously, the IOC members would not have that depth of knowledge to know whether it was misinformation or disinformation. So I think we're all very much aware that our sport is under threat, and we've heard talk about social license to operate. In my view, it's a better way of expressing it by saying it's the ongoing public acceptance of our sport and the role of horses in our lives. So we know that we're under increasingly intense scrutiny, particularly after those issues that I've just referred to in Tokyo. And the campaigns by particularly motivated, politically motivated lobbyists and petitions against our sport. It's good to be aware too that there's two different groups within our detractors, those who object to horses being ridden in a certain way. So if you think about training methods such as roll call, and those who don't want horses ridden at all. But when our sport is under threat, and it is, as we know, we need to show a united front. We need consistent messaging, not personal opinions. Those are damaging. This is not about the individual. This is about the future of equestrian sport as a whole. Transparency, authenticity from one spokesperson. We must not dilute, we must not confuse the message. So every piece of negative media coverage, every social media controversy, every petition chips away at the public acceptance of our sport. And the result is trust is eroded. So how can we rebalance that? Well, I talked about social license earlier on, and that's the public acceptance of the continuing use of horses in sport, the public acceptance, ongoing acceptance of our sport. So you have social license, and the opposite to that is social control. And if you lose social license, you cross that tipping point, then social control is imposed. And that has already been done by the Danish government, which has put in place legislation to protect sport horses because they believed, the government believed that the national governing bodies hadn't reacted sufficiently strongly. And the result is that increasingly FEI regulations around horse welfare are not the same as those of the national laws. So that's the case in Denmark, Sweden, the Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, Britain, Australia, and New Zealand, and oh yes, Italy is progressing quickly too. So it's getting increasingly difficult to maintain that balance, especially as there are more and more horse welfare action groups springing up. They are often politically motivated, particularly the people for the ethical treatment of animals, and they're the ones that shout the loudest. And the louder they shout, the more attention from the public that they attract, and from the politicians, and from the IOC. And we must never forget there's an ever more critical audience out there. And if we lose that balance and we slip from social license to social control, we lose our sport effectively. Just one thing I would say quickly, the distinction between animal rights and animal welfare is important. Animal rights is focused on the ethical argument of whether animals should be used by humans in the first place, whereas animal welfare is focused on the quality of animals' lives. So groups like the Brook or World Horse Welfare are the ones who look after animal welfare. So I think we're not doing ourselves any favor with our terminology, which is honestly, it makes no sense to anyone else other than us. I mean, who knows what a blood horse is outside our immediate community? Or worse, a horse with a lot of blood. And after the issues in Tokyo, I think that rings a lot of alarm bells. Who knows, who knows what a horse is that has burst? We do, but people outside the equestrian community don't. It's not technical speak, it's our everyday language. We talk about breaking horses, we talk about green horses, nappy horses, horses napping, horses tying up, horse trials. It's incomprehensible to non-horsey people. If we want to bring in new fans, we have to be able to adapt and maybe looking at simple changes to our terminology that we use automatically with something that we can do to help the situation. There's simple wins. Don't call a horse it. Horses have a gender, him or her. Don't talk about blood horses. We refer to horses with a lot of quality instead. We don't have to constantly refer to blood horses. Even just talking about using horses in sport sounds like coercion to those who want to see the negative side. It is a partnership, and it's up to us to ensure that where it does exist, any element of coercion or even a suggestion of coercion is removed, not just by the rules, but by the individuals who practice equestrian sport, by the whole community, and most importantly, that we're actually seen to be doing that. So what's the FEI doing? Well, they made changes to the jumping rules, which were implemented after Tokyo, which meant that the president of the ground jury could stop a horse on course if there were a potential health or welfare risk. It was a groundbreaking rule change, but the International Jumping Riders Club weren't very happy with it, and it has been very rarely used. Second thing that the FEI did was they introduced the Equine Ethics and Wellbeing Commission in 2022, post-Tokyo. And the result is the FEI Equine Welfare Strategy, which is the connecting thread basically that runs through everything that the FEI does. And the FEI jumping rules, as you all know, because you'll have a lot more things to learn soon, there's been a complete rules revision for the FEI jumping rules this year, and the proposed new rules will be voted on at the FEI General Assembly next month. And these include the proposed introduction of recorded warnings for minor blood with natural causes, such as a bitten tongue or a bitten lip, insect bite. There will be further discussion in the rules session at the General Assembly in Hong Kong. That will be, the rule session is the 6th of November, and the General Assembly, when the national federations will vote, is the following day, the 7th of November. So tight nosebands have also been addressed in a better way. Over-tightened nosebands have been tested cross-discipline by FEI stewards since forever. But the two-finger rule wasn't consistent. You have different stewards, different sizes, different approaches to where on the nose to test. And if you look at the top image on the left-hand side, you can see a gap along the sides of the flash noseband. That doesn't mean it's not tight across the nasal bone. And according to the vets, lesions of the nasal bone are increasingly common due to over-tightened nosebands. So the FEI introduced the official noseband measuring device, which I'm sure a lot of you are already using since 1st of May. And as you know, the device is also available to buy, so athletes and grooms can check the horse's nosebands themselves. And also from an FEI perspective, the FEI stakeholder meeting on tack and equipment, which was held 2 weeks ago. The forum, and we've got Charles Maudlin there, who maybe is online with us today. He was one of the speakers for the IJOC webinar about the noseband measuring device, which you probably all were on as well. And he's pictured here with Henrik Anker-Krona, the Swedish chef to keep, and IJRC President Francois Matty. So in addition to detailed discussions around the whole topic of tack and equipment, forum participants, and there were online participants too, were also advised of a proposed rule change that, if approved at the General Assembly in Hong Kong, will mean all tack and equipment rules from the individual disciplines will be combined in a dedicated tack and equipment requirements section, which that will be effective from the 1st of January 2026. But jumping will only be implementing it from the 1st of January 2027. And blood on the horse, that's always a controversial topic, and the FEI has come under considerable pressure from both detractors of our sport, but also from the International Jumping Riders Club, who feel that it hasn't been dealt with correctly. And they were particularly strong after the elimination of the Brazilian athlete Pedro Vinícius and Nimrod de Muse last year in Paris, after he jumped clear, and then he was eliminated for blood on the horse in the post-competition tack check, boot and bandage control. So that meant the elimination of the Brazilian team. The proposed new rule, as I said earlier on, that will be voted on at the General Assembly, will replace elimination with a recorded warning, as I said. That is already controversial, as it's seen to be downgrading sanction for blood on a horse. So if a horse is eliminated for blood, or if the rules are changed so the recorded warning is issued, and you are approached by media with a question and you're not the official designated spokesperson, as I said earlier, please do not say no comment, as it suggests guilt, and please don't say I've been told not to speak to the media. You can simply say, I don't have all the details, but I will get somebody to come back to you on this. Take their contact details, ask them if they have a deadline, show them courtesy, but without giving them anything to quote you on, and then follow up with the on-site media team or with FEI Communications, who will make sure the reporter is provided with a statement or potentially a comment from the official spokesperson. So how do we turn the tide in our favor? As I said earlier on, we're all ambassadors for our sport, for our industry as a whole. It's a responsibility we all have to take, and we all have to take it very, very seriously. We need to find influencers outside our community who will publicly support and promote our sport. So we are looking for third-party endorsements, and those are very, very powerful. It's all very well having somebody saying from within our sport about the good works that we do, but if we have third-party endorsements, they carry a lot more weight. And we need to engage with our critics. In fact, athletes are actually getting far more involved in showing the public how the well-being of their horses is ensured. They have open days, they have more posts on social media platforms. The Dutch show jumper Willem Greve invited the People for the Ethical Treatment for Animals to his stables. The former FEI Driving Committee chair, Frenchman Benjamin Ayot, who works with Cirque du Soleil on their equestrian show, invited a representative from PETA to spend a week with them. And they accepted the invitation, and they were there 24 hours a day if they wanted to see the reality, to see how the horses were really, really well cared for. And it totally changed their view. But they, and certain sections of the media, as I said right at the beginning, they're using increasingly, how should I say, covert ways to dig out welfare issues, including using undercover journalists posing as grooms, which is what they did with Luca Beerbaum and with the Danish dressage athlete Andreas Helgstrand. And they're very, very damaging to our sport. And again, this is all being picked up by mainstream media because it's about an Olympian, and they will run much, much bigger stories. They look more deeply into them. Anytime now that there's a story about horse abuse, the mainstream media immediately refer back to all the previous ones that have involved Olympians. So what do you do if you are the official? I've already spoken a bit briefly about if you're not the official designated spokesperson. What do you do if you are the official designated spokesperson? And there's been an incident during a competition and you are on the top table at a press conference. You get a phone call from a journalist asking questions about an incident that you might or might not have been involved in. or you get ambushed by a broadcast reporter brandishing a microphone or a camera or both. So what guidelines can I give you that will help you get through some of these situations where you may or may well be less than comfortable? And for sure, all of the above are quite intimidating, especially if you're not used to it. So if you're on the top table at a press conference, I suggest that even before the show starts, if you're in a senior role in your officiating role, be proactive and ask the organizing committee and or the FEI if you will be the official designated spokesperson. If there's an incident and you are asked to speak about it at a press conference, you will be briefed either by the on-site press team or by FEI Communications. If you haven't been briefed and you are told there's a press conference coming up, contact FEI Communications to ask for their assistance. They need to know that there's been an incident and they may not have been informed if they're not on site. So you'll be helping them, and in return, they can help you. And if a journalist asks you for an interview where you will be asked to represent the FEI or the interests, the position of the FEI, say you're in the middle of something and you'll get back to them. Then contact FEI Communications immediately. I can't say that often enough. Do not agree to an interview without talking to FEI Comms first. If it's agreed, you will do the interview. Remember why the journalist is interested in speaking to you in particular. They want to speak to you in your role as an FEI official. It's not a personal opinion. If you want to voice a personal opinion, of course, that's your right, but make sure the journalist understands that, because otherwise everything you say will be viewed as coming from an FEI spokesperson. It will be seen as, and it will be quoted as, the official line. And then the messages become blurred, they become confused. Now, you do have the right to say no to an interview, but if you do, just think of the implications of refusing. It may actually make the situation worse. The story will be written or broadcast with or without you. And we've all seen or heard or read news stories that say Mr. X declined our invitation to speak about the situation. And that looks like somebody's got something to hide. It's a bit like always tell the truth. It's important to remember you don't have to do an on-the-spot phone interview or do an interview immediately at an FEI event. You can tell the journalist, you will get back to them and ask for their deadline. That will give you time to prepare your answers with help from FEI Communications. And it's a good idea to get back, if it is agreed that you're going to do the interview, get back to the journalist way before that deadline, as that may give you the opportunity, may not, may give you the possibility to help shape the angle of the story. If you call at the last minute, the journalist will have already prepared their story. It will consist of the journalist's perspective and the perspective of other people that they've already spoken to, and your contribution will just be an add-on or may not be used at all. It's highly unlikely, if they've got deadlines, they will not be doing a rewrite if you ring them at the last minute. So let's look at preparation. First of all, contact FEI Communications. They can advise you on what you can and, equally importantly, what you maybe cannot say. For example, in the event of a serious on-course accident, no details of injuries should be given, and never speculate on the outcome for either equine or human athletes. There's lots of protocols, as we're all aware, that have to be gone through before anything is released to media. And details of injuries obviously are confidential unless the owner of the horse or the injured athlete or their family have given permission for that information to be released. If you can do the interview by email, that's even better, but not appropriate if you're simply being asked for a comment on an incident. What you can say is, I understand that an update will be issued, and then suggest that they go to the media center. And it's the same response if you get ambushed by a TV reporter. Please get the questions in advance. Think of the worst possible questions and prepare responses with FEI Communications, and rehearse. Do's and don'ts. Whatever you do, don't lie, because you will be found out, and it's not it's not always a question of not telling the truth. You need to be sure of the facts before you respond to a question. If you don't know the answer, better be honest and say you don't know than to give an incorrect answer that could come across as a lie. If you should know, for example, if it's something from the rules, then make sure you do know. The rules are your friends. I think if you can try and think almost in bullet points, that way you'll provide sound bites, which the media love. If you talk at length and in a convoluted way, you either won't be quoted or worse, you'll be misquoted because they will just take out the bit that fits with their perspective and use it, and out of context, it will be misquoted. But you have actually said it. So and also so use short sentences and simple vocabulary for sure. Make sure that sorry, I'm getting confused here. If you are misquoted, sorry, that's what I was going to say. If you are misquoted, get in contact with the FEI or your national federation for help in getting a correction, because it's important that what you did say is what is used, not a misquote. And be polite. If, say, for one scenario, if a reporter cuts across you mid-sentence, and reporters are inclined to do it, very politely say, if I may, I'd like to finish the point I was making, and then repeat your key message. Say what you need to say and then stop. Don't continue speaking. That's the best way to fall down the rabbit hole, and you can say something that you don't mean to say, and then when you're quoted, you'll be like, oh, I don't even remember saying that. So that's the do's. And for some don'ts, I've said it several times already, and I'll repeat it. Do not use the phrase no comment. It implies guilt. It implies you or we, the sport, have something to hide. Please don't use technical jargon. We've talked about that a bit, or acronyms. So if you use FEI, IOC, that's okay, but it's probably better. We, of course, all know about the International Jumping Officials Club, but a journalist may well not. If they're from our sport, yes, they probably will. But if you're speaking to somebody who's mainstream journalist, they're not going to know who IJOC is. They also will not know what WBGT index is, which is, as we know, the wet bulb globe temperature index. But its acronyms are very confusing, especially to journalists who are not from our sport. Don't repeat the negatives in a question, particularly if you're doing a television interview. In fact, basically never repeat the question. The reporter's questions could be edited out from a recorded broadcast interview, and they will use you repeating it, and it will just be a soundbite from you. So it will come across as you being negative, not the journalist. And don't answer a question that hasn't been asked. As I said earlier, say what you need to say and then stop. And don't comment on something that's not your area of expertise. If you're asked about footing and you're not the TD or the course designer, it's very simple. You can just say, that's not my area of expertise, but I can find the right person for you to speak to. Don't offer a name, because that puts that person in a difficult position. Contact that person yourself and advise them that a journalist is looking for information. So top tips. We talked about being prepared. Think about what you want to say. You will only need 2 or 3 points, and you should already have those from FEI Communications at this point. Visualize the interview, rehearse, and remember to breathe, particularly for a broadcast interview. Keep your shoulders down and keep your hands in your lap so you look relaxed, even if you're not. Say what you need to say and then stop. It isn't your job to fill the silence, especially in a broadcast interview. Silence is really powerful, and there is a human urge to fill it. And that's what reporters, including me when I was a reporter, that's what reporters rely on. But don't be lured into saying more than you want to say. So don't get caught up in a fascinating intellectual debate on, say, why the blood rules are different across the disciplines. Remember that tip about not commenting on something that is not your area of expertise. If you're asked about why the blood rules are not harmonized, you can say, I'm a jumping official, so my role is to implement the jumping rules. You would need to put that question about harmonization to the FEI. So in other words, never speak on behalf of someone else. I think one of the very important things to get across is help FEI communications to help you. Make the time to let them know you've been approached by the media. We need those facts. We need transparency and we need speed to maintain trust. So let comms know that you've been approached by media and the on-site press officer. It will also, not just it means that they can help you, but it also gives them a heads up that they will need to have a statement ready. They almost certainly will already have a statement ready, but just in case they don't, it's a good opportunity by you ringing them to say you need to have a statement ready. The FEI has a crisis management plan, which has templates for statements for human and equine fatalities, for injuries, and a very basic Q&A. It also has statement templates pre-prepared for all kinds of incidents, so there's no need to reinvent the wheel on site if something bad happens. FEI Communications is always available to provide support. They have an on-call system for weekends. They're not in the office generally, but they have an on-call system, so please make use of that. They have briefing documents, which include the official FEI position on a large number of contentious issues, such as a Q&A and messaging on hyper and hypo sensitivity, plus a statement template on that. Also for blood eliminations, which clearly that will need to be updated if the proposed revision is to the blood rule is accepted at the FEI General Assembly. And very briefly on crisis communications, as I said, the FEI has a very detailed crisis management plan that is shared with all OCs, and that includes details on crisis communications and who does what in the event of a serious incident. It also gives details of the composition of the crisis management team and how all the communications channels should be put in place, as well as templates for holding statements if there is an incident, how to respond to media questions, and template for press releases. FEI Comms is there to work with all of you, all FEI officials. So please, they're there to support you in every way possible with media inquiries, with just guidance in general and advice. It's a service organization, so please, please make use of it. They're there to help you. Now yes, yes,
Sorry for interrupting. Oh, I
yes,
think we're just at the right place now
yes, you
because
are. You're most welcome to interrupt.
we just received a question and actually it was about the FEI communication department. Is there a contact number or a hotline that the officials could
Thank
use?
you. Whoever sent in that question, it's a very, very relevant one. It's one I'm asked frequently. At the moment, when I was FEI Comms Director, I can stop sharing my screen now.
All right.
When I was Communications Director, I spent a lot of time trying to ensure that there was a generic number that could be used for the person who was on call. It was never put in place, despite my best efforts. And I asked FEI Communications today if that had been put in place now. As yet, no, it hasn't. So what I suggest is if you are a member, if you are an official at an FEI event and you will be in a senior role and you may well end up having to contact FEI Communications, I suggest you get in touch with them, and the details are all on the website, during the week of your event, but not at the weekend. Get it done beforehand so that you have contact details, because they will be able to tell you who will be on call that weekend. So unfortunately, that does mean you have to be proactive on this, but it's better that than something happens at your event and then you then can't get the assistance that you need. Does that answer your question?
I think so. Yes. Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Any more, Ali?
I just had one. Actually, it was about the crisis management plan. Thank you for referring to that, because it is quite well structured and we know all the details there. However, as you've given in the examples, the increasing number of potential protesters for animal activists on the events are, or can increase, so to say. Do you think there must be some updates also in that crisis management plan? Because so far the social media aspect is, I think, only left alone to FEI communications, and not more is mentioned.
It's a very valid point, Ali. Frankly, at the moment, there's a slight, the FEI communications looks after, so the communications team is different to the commercial team, which includes the digital team. So the digital team looks after social media. So from that perspective, there is joined up thinking. Of course there is. It's a very professional outfit. There needs to be more, and I agree. And I've already spoken. They have a new, as you've probably all seen, that there's the new executive director of sports and games. And there's also a new executive director who is the overarching boss of the communications team, but also the commercial and marketing team. And I've met with him twice now already, and I have said to him that there needs to be more on the social media side around crisis management. So he is looking at that, and I think he's very proactive. So I think that you can expect something to be done very, very soon on that.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm checking if we have any other questions so far. Not yet. Let me check Facebook as well, in case we have something there. Again, social media.
Again, social media, yes. Well, it's a very important aspect.
Indeed. No, not so far. Glenn, do you have any questions?
No, not from my end.
I hope that that has covered everything for everyone. I mean, it was long and quite intense, but I think it does cover all aspects. I think it should help everyone. And as I say, the vast majority of IJOC members probably will never have to have any interaction with the media, but just in case they do, I hope that the tips and tricks that I've provided will help them to feel more comfortable in that. But can I stress, as I did throughout, please keep in touch with FEI communications. It's so important. It's important for everybody, for everybody's reputations, including the individual IJOC members.
It's a good and a strong advice, in my opinion. If there are no further questions, I would like to thank you, Grania, for your help and assistance and your very nice message and your good presentation, including those tips and tricks and good messages to do and not to do in case of emergency or whatsoever. So thank you to our members. I would say I hope you enjoyed this webinar again today. If you still have questions, feel free to drop us a note. And we can and will forward those to Grania as well. And I'm quite convinced you will be helpful there as well if there is some feedback we can provide or whatsoever. So thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you, Grania, for your lead on this. And hope to see you all somewhere, sometime around the globe on one or the other event.
Thank you, Glenn. Happy jumping, everyone.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you very much,
Bye-bye.
Grania.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.